You know that feeling when you're making your morning coffee and your phone buzzes and you think it's just another boring notification? Well, that morning changed everything. I was standing in my tiny apartment kitchen in Prague, stirring cream into my coffee when I got a video message from Emma, my old neighbor from back home. We hadn't talked in years, but she'd always been kind to me before. Well, before everything fell apart. I almost didn't open it. The subject line just said, "Thought you should see this." But curiosity got the better of me and I tapped play while taking my first sip of coffee. What I saw made me spit it right back out. It was footage of a church service. A funeral, actually. The camera was shaky, clearly recorded secretly from someone's phone. I could see people filing into pews, all dressed in black, tissues in hand. Then the camera panned to the front of the church and my blood went cold. There, next to a beautiful flower arrangement and flickering candles, was a large photograph. My photograph. My senior year high school photo, the one my mom always said captured my smile perfectly. But this wasn't hanging in some family hallway, this was sitting on an easel next to what looked like an urn. I dropped my phone. The video kept playing on the kitchen floor, the sound echoing up at me as I stood there in complete shock. This had to be some kind of mistake, right? Some horrible, twisted joke. But as I picked up the phone with trembling hands, I saw my parents standing at the podium. My father was speaking first. "Was taken from us too soon," he said, his voice carrying that practiced sadness you hear at funerals. "She was always headstrong, always determined to go her own way. We just never thought that way would lead her so far from home, so far from us." Mom was dabbing her eyes with a tissue, nodding along. She looked genuinely grief-stricken, Oscar-worthy performance, really. Then she stepped up to speak. "My daughter had her struggles," she began, and I could hear the slight tremor in her voice. "She made some mistakes, some choices we couldn't understand, but she was still our baby girl. We just wish we could have helped her find her way home." I replayed that video 17 times. 17, I counted. Each time I kept thinking I'd misunderstood something, that there was some explanation that would make this make sense. But there wasn't. There I was, very much alive, standing in my apartment in Prague, watching my own funeral service, watching my parents lie to a room full of people about how I died. The worst part, they were good at it, really good. Their grief looked genuine, their tears seemed real. If I didn't know better, if I wasn't literally standing there breathing, I might have believed them too. But I knew the truth. 3 years ago, they didn't lose a daughter, they threw one away. Let me take you back to where this nightmare really began. 3 years earlier, I was living what I thought was a pretty good life. I was 23, working at my family's small but successful accounting firm, living in the apartment above my parents' garage, and dating this guy named Tyler who I thought might be the one. My little sister was 21, fresh out of college, and everything seemed normal. Well, as normal as things ever were in our family. C had always been the golden child. Always. From the time we were kids, she could do no wrong. When she got caught cheating on a test in high school, it was because the teacher didn't explain the material properly. When she crashed mom's car senior year, it was because the roads were slippery. When she dropped out of her first college after one semester, it was because the school wasn't the right fit for someone with her potential. Me, I was the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who did her homework, worked part-time through high school, graduated with honors, and came straight home to work in the family business. I wasn't bitter about it, not really. That's just how our family worked, was the star and I was the steady support system. So when Dad asked me to take over more of the financial responsibilities at the firm, I was actually excited. Finally, I thought they were seeing my worth. They were trusting me with something important. I threw myself into the work, learning every aspect of our clients' accounts, organizing systems that hadn't been touched in years, and really making the business run smoother than it ever had. That's how I noticed the discrepancies. At first, I thought it was just sloppy bookkeeping, some transactions that didn't quite add up, some withdrawals that seemed oddly timed. But the more I dug, the clearer the pattern became. Someone was skimming money from the business accounts. Not huge amounts at once, that would be too obvious, but regular, smaller amounts that added up to something significant over time. $60,000 to be exact. I spent weeks double-checking my math, going through every transaction, printing out bank statements and highlighting irregularities. I made spreadsheets, I created timelines. I wanted to be absolutely sure before I brought this to my parents because I knew how serious this was. This wasn't just about the money, though $60,000 was definitely serious for a small business like ours. This was about trust. This was about family. When I finally had all my evidence organized, I scheduled a family meeting. I remember I even made dinner that night, thinking we'd need to discuss this calmly and privately. I laid out all my findings on the dining room table like I was presenting a case to a jury. "There's been some embezzlement from the business accounts," I began, trying to keep my voice steady and professional. "I've traced it back over 18 months and the total amount taken is just over $60,000. The silence in that room was deafening. Mom and Dad exchanged a look that I couldn't quite read and went very, very still. "The transactions were made using administrative access," I continued. And they were always scheduled for times when the office was officially closed, but when someone with a key could have come in. That's when Dad spoke up. "These are very serious accusations you're making." "I know, Dad, that's why I was so thorough. I have everything documented here. Bank statements, transaction records, access logs. I think we need to contact the police and our insurance company and probably a lawyer too." Another long silence, then Mom asked, "Do you have any idea who might have done this?" I hesitated because I did have an idea. The timing lined up perfectly with when had started working part-time at the office. She'd been given a key and administrative access so she could help with filing and basic data entry when her college schedule allowed, but I didn't want to accuse my own sister without being absolutely certain. "I think we should let the police investigate," I said carefully. "They'll be able to trace the exact source better than I can." That's when finally spoke, "It was me." Just like that, flat matter of fact, it was me. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I mean, I suspected, but hearing her actually admit it was somehow still a shock. Mom gasped, reaching for her hand across the table. "I didn't mean for it to get so out of hand," continued, and now she was crying. "It started small, just a few hundred here and there when I needed help with school expenses. I kept telling myself I'd pay it back, but then graduation costs came up, and then I needed a deposit for my apartment, and then..." She dissolved into tears, and Mom immediately got up to hug her. Dad sat back in his chair, looking like he'd aged 10 years in 10 seconds. "We'll figure this out," Mom said, stroking his hair. "We'll fix this." And you know what they did? They figured it out all right. They figured out how to make it all my fault. The next morning, Dad called me into his office at the firm, was there too, along with Mom. They were all sitting on one side of the desk, and there was a single chair on the other side for me. It felt like I was walking into an intervention or maybe a tribunal. Dad began, "We've been up all night discussing this situation." "Good," I said, settling into the chair, "because we need to decide how to handle reporting this and what kind of repayment plan." "There won't be any reporting," Dad cut me off. I blinked. "What do you mean?" "Made a mistake," Mom said, reaching over to squeeze my sister's hand. "A big mistake, yes, but she's family. We don't turn family over to the authorities." "But Dad, $60,000. "Will be paid back," he said firmly. "Has agreed to a repayment plan. She'll work at the firm full-time now, and her salary will go directly toward paying back what she took." I looked around the room, trying to understand what was happening. "Okay, but even with a repayment plan, don't we need to document this properly, for tax purposes if nothing else?" "That's where you come in," Dad said, and something in his tone made my stomach drop. "You've been managing the books. You're the one who would have had to authorize these transactions or at least oversee them." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Dad continued, "that from an outside perspective it looks like this happened under your watch, with your access, with your oversight." "Are you accusing me of?" "I'm not accusing you of anything," Dad said. "I'm telling you how this looks, and I'm telling you that the best thing for this family, for this business, is for us to handle this quietly, internally." I felt like I was in some kind of alternate reality, but I'm the one who discovered it, I'm the one who brought it to you. "And we appreciate that," Mom said. "We really do, sweetheart, but think about what's best for everyone here. Is young, she made a mistake, but she has her whole life ahead of her. Do we really want to ruin that over money that will be paid back anyway?" "And you," Dad added, "you've been wanting more independence, more responsibility. Maybe this is a sign that you're ready to move on from the family business. Spread your wings a little." The room was spinning. I gripped the arms of the chair to steady myself. "Are you firing me?" "We're suggesting," Mom said carefully, "that it might be time for you to find your own path, away from the business, away from the complications this situation has created." "What complications?" "Stole money," she admitted it. "Those are the only complications here." That's when spoke up, and her voice was nothing like the tearful, repentant tone from the night before. "You've always resented me. Everyone knows that. Maybe you saw this as your chance to finally get me in real trouble." I stared at her. "Are you serious right now?" "I'm just saying," she continued, "that you've always been jealous of the attention I get, and maybe you thought if you could frame this whole thing as me being some kind of criminal." "Frame it?" I stood up so fast the chair nearly tipped over. "You literally confessed last night in this very house." "I was scared," said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "You presented all this evidence and made it sound so official and scary. I thought maybe if I took responsibility you'd go easier on me, but now I'm wondering if some of that evidence might have been manipulated." I looked at my parents, waiting for them to call out this obvious lie, waiting for them to remember that less than 24 hours ago, their younger daughter had admitted to stealing $60,000 from their business. Instead, Dad sighed deeply and said, "This is exactly why we need to handle this as a family. These kinds of accusations and counter-accusations aren't helping anyone. Counter-accusations, I repeated. Dad, she stole money, she admitted it, what counter-accusations? The accusation, Mom said slowly, that you might have been involved in this yourself. The floor might as well have opened up and swallowed me whole. You think I stole money from our own family business? We don't want to think that, Dad said, but you have to understand our position. You had access, you had opportunity, and frankly, you're the one who benefits most from being blamed for this. How do I benefit from? You've always felt overlooked, Mom interrupted. You've always felt like got more attention, more opportunities. Maybe you saw this as your chance to be the hero, catch the thief, save the business, finally be the daughter who matters most. I couldn't breathe, I literally couldn't breathe. These people who had raised me, who I thought knew me better than anyone in the world, were sitting there suggesting I was capable of theft and fraud and framing my own sister. Even if that were true, I said when I finally found my voice, which it's not, how would I have stolen the money? The transactions were made with access codes. Access codes that you set up, Dad pointed out, access codes that you could have used yourself. But the timing could have been manipulated, said. You're good with computers, everyone knows that. I looked around the room one more time, really looked at their faces, and I finally understood what was happening. This wasn't about the money. This wasn't about evidence or truth or justice. This was about protecting no matter what the cost, and apparently I was the cost. So what happens now? I asked quietly. Now, Dad said, we move forward as a family. We'll work to pay back what was taken and you'll find your own path. Everyone gets a fresh start. And if I don't agree to this fresh start? The silence that followed was answer enough. Mom said finally, you're an adult, you can make your own choices, but you need to understand that choices have consequences. What kind of consequences? The kind that come from making serious accusations against family members, Dad said. The kind that come from stirring up trouble that could hurt people you're supposed to love. I understood then. I could go along with their version of events, that I was leaving the family business voluntarily, that the missing money was just a bookkeeping error that had been resolved, that everything was fine, or I could find myself completely cut off from the only family I'd ever known. I need some time to think, I said. Of course, Mom said, sounding relieved. Take all the time you need, sweetheart. But I didn't get time. The next morning, I woke up to find the locks changed on the office. When I tried to log into the business computer systems, my access had been revoked. My company credit card was declined when I tried to buy coffee. And when I went to my parents' house to talk, Mom answered the door like she was talking to a stranger. I think it's better if you don't come around for a while, she said, not quite meeting my eyes, until things settle down. Mom, what things? What needs to settle down? Please don't make this harder than it has to be. Make what harder? I still don't understand what I supposedly did wrong. Mom sighed, and for just a moment she looked like my mom again, tired and sad and maybe a little conflicted. You accused your sister of being a thief, you tried to have her arrested. How did you think we were going to react to that? I thought you were going to want to know the truth. The truth is that this family needs to heal, and right now your presence is making that impossible. She closed the door, and I stood there on the porch where I'd sat drinking lemonade just a few days earlier, trying to understand how my entire life had been turned upside down in less than 48 hours. That afternoon, I drove to Tyler's apartment. I needed to talk to someone who knew me, someone who would listen to the whole story and help me figure out what to do next. But when I got there, Tyler was awkward and distant. Hey, he said, not inviting me in. I was actually just about to call you. Good, because I really need to talk. The craziest thing has happened with my family. I think we should take a break. I stopped mid-sentence. What? I've been thinking about us, about where this is going, and I just think maybe we both need some space to figure things out. Tyler, what are you talking about? Yesterday you were asking if I wanted to drive up to your parents' lake house next weekend. He wouldn't meet my eyes. People change, situations change. I just think it's better if we don't see each other for a while. Later, I would find out that my parents had called him. They'd told him I was going through some kind of breakdown, that I was making wild accusations and causing drama, that I probably wasn't in a good place to be in a relationship right now. They'd convinced him that staying with me would just enable my destructive behavior. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that in the span of 24 hours, I'd lost my job, my home, my family, and my boyfriend, all because I'd tried to do the right thing. I ended up staying in a cheap motel for a week while I tried to figure out my next move. I called my aunt, my dad's sister, thinking maybe she could help me understand what was happening. But when I started to explain the situation, she cut me off. Your parents told me you were having some problems. I think it's best if you work this out with them directly. I tried calling my cousin Jake, who I'd always been close with, same response. I tried reaching out to family friends, people who had known me since I was a child. One by one, they all gave me variations of the same message. Your parents said you're going through a difficult time. We think it's best if you handle this privately. We don't want to get involved in family drama. It was like they'd all gotten the same script, and maybe they had. The final blow came when I tried to access my bank account and found that my parents had somehow gotten themselves removed as co-signers on my savings account, an account I'd opened when I was 16 and never bothered to change. The account that held all my money from working at the family business. The account that was now frozen while the bank sorted out what they called conflicting ownership claims. I sat in that motel room with $17 in cash, no job, no family, no friends, and no prospects, trying to understand how telling the truth had destroyed my entire life. That's when I decided to leave, not just the town but the country. I had a passport from a college trip to Europe, and I'd managed to scrape together enough money for a one-way ticket to London. I figured I could find work there, start over completely, build a new life where nobody knew about the mess I'd left behind. The night before I left, I wrote my parents a letter. I told them I loved them, that I hoped they'd eventually realize what really happened, and that I'd be waiting for them to reach out when they were ready to hear the truth. I told them where I was going and promised to stay in touch. I never heard back. For 3 years, I built a quiet life in Europe. I worked odd jobs, teaching English, doing freelance bookkeeping, working in cafes and hostels. I moved around a lot, never staying in one place long enough to form real attachments. I kept my social media accounts deactivated and tried to avoid anything that might connect me back to my old life. But I never completely gave up hope. Every few months, I'd send my parents an email or a letter just letting them know I was okay and that I still loved them. I sent postcards from different cities, photos of beautiful places I'd been, little updates about my life. I always included my contact information, always made it clear that I wanted to reconcile. I never got a single response. Last year, I tried to renew my old email account, the one I'd had since high school, and was told it had been permanently closed due to the account holder being deceased. That's when I first started to suspect something wasn't right. I managed to contact my cousin Jacob, who had always been the most reasonable person in our extended family. When he answered my Skype call, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. He said, leaning closer to his camera, "Is this really you?" "Of course it's me, Jacob. What's going on? Why does everyone think I'm dead?" That's when he told me the story my family had been telling for the past year. According to them, I'd died in a car accident while traveling in Eastern Europe. They said I'd been backpacking alone, that I'd been in a remote area with poor cell service, and that by the time authorities identified my body, it was too damaged for transport. They said I'd been cremated locally according to my wishes, and that they'd held a small memorial service with just immediate family. But Jacob said, staring at me through the computer screen, "If you're alive, then what the hell is going on?" That's exactly what I intended to find out. I started by gathering documentation of my travels. Passport stamps, visa applications, work permits, lease agreements, bank statements. I collected evidence of every place I'd been and every job I'd held for the past 3 years. I wanted to create an undeniable record that I had been alive and well during the time my family claimed I was dead. Then I hired a private investigator to look into public records back home. What we found made my blood run cold. 6 months after my supposed death, my inheritance from my grandmother, money that had been held in trust until my 25th birthday, had been quietly transferred to. The death certificate filed with the county looked official enough, but when we dug deeper, we found inconsistencies in the paperwork and signatures that didn't quite match the samples we could find from legitimate documents. My family hadn't just disowned me, they had literally erased me from existence and profited from it. Armed with this information, I contacted a lawyer who specialized in identity theft and fraud. She was fascinated by my case. Apparently, it's incredibly rare for someone to successfully fake another person's death, especially for financial gain. "This is serious criminal fraud," she told me during our first meeting. "We're talking about forged documents, identity theft, and probably insurance fraud as well. Your family could be looking at significant prison time." "I don't want them to go to prison," I said. "I just want my life back." "I understand the impulse to protect your family, but you need to understand the scope of what they've done. They didn't just hurt you, they committed crimes against the state. They filed false documents with government agencies. They may have committed tax fraud, insurance fraud, and who knows what else." She was right, of course, but I still wasn't ready to send my parents and sister to jail. I just wanted them to acknowledge what they'd done and make it right. That's when we found out about the memorial service. My lawyer's investigator had been monitoring my family's social media accounts and had posted about a special memorial service they were planning for the 3rd anniversary of my death. It was going to be held at the same church where I'd been baptized, and it was open to the community. This is perfect, my lawyer said when she called to tell me. A public event where they're actively perpetuating the fraud. If you show up, if you confront them publicly, it becomes much harder for them to claim this was all some kind of misunderstanding. I booked a flight home that same day. Standing outside that church, watching people I'd known my entire life filing in to mourn my supposed death, was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. I recognized so many faces, former family friends, neighbors, even some of my old high school classmates. They all believed I was dead. They were all there to pay their respects to someone who was standing across the street, very much alive. I waited until everyone was inside before I walked over to the church entrance. There was a display table set up with photos of me, school pictures, family vacations, candid shots from various holidays and celebrations. Someone had put together a whole photo timeline of my life, ending with that senior portrait I'd seen in Emma's video. Next to the photos was a guest book where people could write messages to my family. I flipped through it, reading notes about what a wonderful daughter I'd been, how sorry people were for my parents' loss, how tragic it was that I'd died so young and so far from home. Mrs., who had been my piano teacher for 6 years, had written, "Always lit up the room with her smile. I know she's looking down on you with love." Mr. from the corner market wrote, "Such a sweet girl, always polite, always asked about my family. The world is dimmer without her light." Page after page of people remembering me kindly, mourning my death, offering comfort to my grieving family. It was beautiful and horrible at the same time. I could hear voices from inside the church. My father was speaking again, sharing memories of my childhood. He was telling the story about how I'd saved my allowance for 3 months to buy mom flowers for Mother's Day when I was 8. It was a true story, and he was telling it with genuine emotion in his voice. That's when I realized the most twisted part of this whole thing. They weren't just pretending to mourn me for appearances. On some level, they actually were mourning me. They had killed off the daughter who had disappointed them, who had caused problems, who had threatened their perfect family dynamic. They were genuinely grieving the loss of the version of me they wished had existed, the one who would have stayed quiet about theft, who would have taken the blame gracefully, who would have disappeared without making waves. In their minds, they weren't lying about my deaths. They were celebrating the death of the daughter who had betrayed them and honoring the memory of the daughter they wished I had been. I waited through my father's speech, through my mother's tearful remembrance, through tribute to her wonderful big sister who always looked out for everyone. I waited until they called for a moment of silence to honor my memory. Then I opened the church doors and walked inside. The silence when I appeared was deafening. Not the peaceful moment of reflection they'd been aiming for, but the shocked silence of 200 people trying to process what they were seeing. I walked slowly down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing in the complete quiet. People were turning in their pews, whispering to each other, pointing at me like I was an actual ghost. Some people looked confused, like they were trying to figure out if I was maybe a cousin who looked similar. Others clearly recognized me and looked absolutely terrified. My mother saw me first. She was standing at the podium, having just finished her speech about her beloved deceased daughter when her eyes met mine. The color drained from her face so completely I thought she might faint. Actually, she did faint, just crumpled right there behind the podium. Dad rushed to help her, and that's when he saw me too. He froze halfway to the podium, his mouth hanging open, staring at me like I really was rising from the dead. But it was a reaction that I'll never forget. She was sitting in the front pew, dressed in elegant black, tissues in hand, playing the part of the grieving sister perfectly. When she saw me, her expression went through about 5 different emotions in rapid succession. Shock, fear, confusion, and this is the part that still gives me chills, anger, pure undiluted anger, not relief that her sister was alive, not joy at this miraculous return. Anger that I had ruined her performance. I made it all the way to the front of the church before anyone found their voice. Then the whispers started. Is that? But she's supposed to be. How is this possible? I stopped right in front of the display of my photos, next to the urn that supposedly contained my ashes. I turned to face the congregation and I could see phones coming out. People were starting to record, to take pictures, to document this impossible moment. "Hello, everyone," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the church sound system. "I know this is probably confusing, seeing me here at my own memorial service, but I have something I need to say." I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder full of documents, passport records, work permits, bank statements, photographs of me taken in various European cities over the past 3 years. All time-stamped, all proving that I had been alive and well during the time my family claimed I was dead. 3 years ago, my family disowned me because I discovered that my sister had stolen $60,000 from our family business. When I tried to report the theft, they accused me of lying, of framing, of trying to destroy our family. They kicked me out of my home, turned all of our relatives and friends against me, and made it clear that I was no longer welcome in their lives. The church was so quiet you could hear people breathing. Mom had recovered from her fainting spell and was now sitting up, staring at me with a mixture of horror and fury. Dad was gripping the back of a pew so hard his knuckles were white, was just glaring at me, not even trying to hide her rage anymore. So I left, I continued. I moved to Europe and I tried to build a new life, but I never stopped hoping that someday my family would realize their mistake and want me back. I sent letters, emails, postcards. I tried to stay in touch to let them know I was okay and that I still loved them. I held up my phone, showing screenshots of all the unanswered messages I'd sent over the years. But instead of reading my letters, instead of responding to my attempts at reconciliation, my family decided it would be easier to just pretend I was dead. They filed a fake death certificate, collected my inheritance, and apparently spent the last year telling everyone that I died tragically in a car accident overseas. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the congregation. I could see people looking at my parents with new understanding, with confusion, with disgust. The truth is, I didn't die in a car accident. I didn't die at all. I've been living and working in Prague for the past 8 months. Before that, I was in London, and before that, I spent 6 months in Berlin. I have documentation of everywhere I've been, everyone I've worked for, every place I've lived. I have passport stamps and visa applications and tax records and employment contracts. I started pulling documents out of my folder and holding them up for everyone to see. I have photographs of myself taken in locations all over Europe, with timestamps that prove I was alive and well during the time my family claims I was dead. I have bank records showing deposits from jobs I held, withdrawals for rent and groceries and travel expenses. I have witness statements from people who worked with me, lived with me, knew me during these supposedly dead years. The murmuring in the church was getting louder. People were looking at each other, looking at my parents, trying to process what they were hearing. But most importantly, I said, raising my voice to be heard over the growing noise, I have legal documents showing that 6 months after my supposed death, my inheritance from my grandmother was transferred to my sister. The same sister who stole $60,000 from our family business. The same sister whose theft I was blamed for when I tried to report it. That's when finally found her voice. She stood up and shouted, "You're lying, you've always been jealous of me and now you're trying to ruin my life." I said calmly, "There are 200 people in this church who just watched you give a tearful speech about how much you missed your dead sister. There are probably 50 phone cameras recording this conversation right now. Are you really going to claim that I'm lying about being alive?" She opened her mouth to respond, but Dad finally stepped forward. He said, his voice shaking, "We can discuss this privately. This isn't the place." "This is exactly the place," I interrupted. "This is a memorial service for someone who isn't dead. This is a room full of people who have been lied to, who came here today to pay their respects to someone who has been living in Europe for the past 3 years. If we're going to discuss this at all, it should be here, in front of everyone who has been affected by your lies." I turned back to the congregation, many of whom were now clearly recording with their phones. "I want everyone here to know that I am alive. I have always been alive. I was never in a car accident, I was never missing, I was never in any kind of danger. My family chose to declare me dead rather than deal with the inconvenience of having disowned me. They chose to fake my death rather than admit they had made a mistake." I paused, looking around the room at faces I'd known since childhood. Some looked sympathetic, some looked shocked, some looked angry, though I wasn't sure if they were angry at me or at my parents. "I'm not here for revenge," I said finally. "I'm not here to humiliate anyone or to cause pain. I'm here because I want my life back, I want my identity back, I want to be legally alive again, and I want my family to acknowledge what they've done and make it right." I folded up my documents and put them back in my purse. "To everyone who came here today to honor my memory, thank you. It means more than you know to see how many people cared about me. But as you can see, I don't need to be honored or remembered. I need to be recognized as the living person I've always been."